I am Rabbi Nathan Davidovich, speaking to you on behalf of the webyeshiva.org, speaking to you from Efrat, Israel. The topic of this discussion is the destructive force of baseless hatred. I must tell you that I, along with many hundreds, millions, hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people in the United States, across the world, were saddened by what we saw last night. I saw the images yesterday of what was going on in the United States Capitol. There was a total disregard for property and human rights. This kind of a siege on the U.S. Capitol had never happened in the last 200 and some years. The last time it happened was when the British burned the Capitol. I was so distressed that I looked in the Parsha of this week because I find that, you know, every Parsha, every section of the Torah are not just a collection of stories, but have a message for us today. And I wanted to see what the message was that I could find in this week's Parsha to explain perhaps what happened and why this kind of thing happens, why this baseless hatred, why people hate one another with no reason. So Parsha Shemot, that is this week's Parsha. It's the first Parsha of the second book of the Torah. And very shortly after the opening of the Parsha, it speaks about Vayokom Melech Chadash. A new king arose, and there was a new Pharaoh, and he at least appeared to not know all that the children of Israel had done, all that Joseph had done to really save the country for famine. And he decided that, you know, we can't live with them around. We got to get rid of them. And we see an example of his hatred of Jews, which has extended throughout history and for no reason. And this hatred of Jews, by extension, really extends to the hatred of anybody with no reason. And this will ultimately lead to destruction. And unfortunately, we live in a world where people hate one another for no reason other than that their beliefs are different from them. Pharaoh was concerned about the beliefs of the Jewish people. He knew that the Jewish people were a light to the world. The Jewish people were looking at things on a spiritual level. The Jewish people were there to remind the world that we have a mission in this world. And the mission is not just to be narcissistic and self gratifying. We're going to talk about what we can do to try and stop this plague of hatred, which I submit is deadlier than the coronavirus that has been plaguing us over the last year. The words of the Parsha, shortly in the Parsha, say as follows: Havanis hakmolo, let us deal shrewdly, let us deal wisely with them, and yirbeh, so they shall not increase. Grenel milchama, that they'll, in the event of war, v'nosef gamhu al sonenu, they'll join up with our enemies, v'nilcham banu v'alamin haaretz, and they will fight against us and rise from the ground. Well, first of all, look at that statement. There was no basis. No basis to believe that the Jewish people were going to combine with the enemies of Egypt to defeat Egypt. But yet, this was a reason, this was something that was made up, and he did that. Now, it's interesting. Das Sechenim, which is a compilation of many of the Bali Tosfos from the 12th and 13th century, I believe. They have an interesting thing about this sentence. It says, "Omer Chazal, shelo shahaya ba'osam eitza bilam be'etza, sorry, ba'osu eitza bilam v'iyov v'yitro." The sages say that the king, Pharaoh, had three advisors who were advising him how to fulfill his desire or listening to him, giving him advice. People were Bilam. Remember the story of Bilam, uh, who was asked to curse the children of Israel, who ended up hitting his mule because it wasn't trying to lead him to do what he wanted to do. And the other two were Job and Yitro. Let's talk about what Bilam is. Pirkei Avos, in chapter 5, verse 19 of the Ethics of the Fathers, says as follows: Kol mi sheyesh biyado shloshim devoro halalu. Everybody who has in their hand these three things, mitalmidav shel Avram Avinu, will be of the students of Avram Avinu. Ushloshim devorim acherim, and whoever has these other things, mitalmidav shel Bilam harash, will be of the students of the wicked Bilam. And what are these three things? Abraham, our forefather, he had a good eye, an ayin tov, a humble spirit, and a moderate appetite. Abraham, we know, was only interested in loving somebody else, doing kindness. Bilam, on the other hand, as it says in Pirkei Avos, had ayin ra, ruach gavoa, v'nefesh rechava. He had an evil eye. He never was able to see the good in anybody else. Everything looked bad to him. He was haughty. He was above everybody else. What counts in this world is me, not somebody else. And a limitless appetite for those things that would satisfy him. We know that baseless hatred, which in Hebrew is called sinat chinam, is what destroyed the holy temple in Jerusalem. Baseless hatred of one another is destructive. It leads only in destruction. This is something that we need to correct in our society. Unfortunately, we are still plagued by it, as you can see by not only the events of last night, but the events of the entire year. How do you get around baseless hatred? How do you undo it? You undo it by substituting for it ahavas chinam, baseless love, loving somebody because they're human beings, recognizing that we are all the children of God, and recognizing that we should relate to one another as brothers and sisters should relate to one another, not with hatred, not with violence, but with love. We should look at somebody and see the good in everybody else. Look beyond the surface. Don't worry about what they're saying that may offend your beliefs. Go beyond that. Live as a human being, live as a Jew. The way to come close to God is by doing what God wants us to do in this world, which is loving one another, kindness to one another, chesed. I bless us all to be able to do as Rabbi Akiva said, "V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha zeklal gadol b'Torah." Love your neighbor as yourself. That's the basic, fundamental aspect of Torah. The love of others. Love your neighbor as yourself. Let's put that into practice. Let's get rid of the sinas chinam. Let's get rid of the baseless hatred. Replace it by a havas chinam. I wish everybody a Shabbat of true love, a time of healing of all of us as Jews and as human beings. And I wish everybody a wonderful Shabbat. And I thank you for listening on behalf of the webyeshiva.org. Shabbat Shalom.